Good evening. Welcome to the September 25th, 2023 special meeting of the Stillwater City Council. This time I will call the meeting to order, and tonight is a study session with a couple of different presentations. So we're going to jump right into the agenda tonight, and we will start item 2A, which is a presentation and discussion of electric utility rate study, and Lauren Smith from the Stillwater Electric Utility is going to kick us off.
Good evening, Council. October of 2022, the trustees approved staff to enter into an electric cost of service and rate design agreement with LM Vetter Consulting. Since then, an expert internal team has been working with Lisa Vetter to complete the study. At this time, I would like to recognize the team for their hard work and dedication to this great effort. Christy Cluck, Dana Maddox, Brady Moore, Jared Thulin, Brad Stewart, Lisa Vetter, and myself. These studies are very complicated to complete, involving many different perspectives, individual expertise, visionary thinking, and a tremendous amount of data compilation and analysis. Lisa Vetter is here this evening to share the results of the cost of service study, to answer any questions you may have, and discuss a potential path forward. Once she is done, I will step back up and give you some calendar dates for future events that we should mark. So, Lisa?
Good evening. I've been here before in 2019, so nice to see you again, Mayor Joyce and Vice Mayor. I will not try to pronounce your last name, sorry. And then it's nice to see new faces. I have worked with the City of Stillwater now since 2019 on various rate and utility matters. And so tonight we're going to talk about all the work we've done on this cost of service study. I'm the principal of LM Vetter Consulting. I have a master's in public administration from Harvard University, and I have an undergrad from Madison in industrial engineering. I'm a certified internal auditor, and I also have a certification in control self-assessment. I have over 30 years in the utility industry, primarily around regulatory, rates, and cost of service, financial forecasting, all sorts of things. So tonight, we're going to go over a quick history of SUA electric rates, key events since the last study, and there are quite a few of them. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about rate design and how it works, present our study results and recommendations, and then there'll be time for questions and answers. So the last rate study, I think the results were presented in February 2020, right before everything in the world changed. At that time, the recommendations were what we would call revenue neutral. It meant that you didn't need to increase the amount of revenues you were collecting through rates, but we recommended changes in how you were collecting that money between customer classes. There was the pandemic, and so at that time, the rate recommendations were not implemented. You have a mechanism that allows for automatic increases based on inflation every January. And due to the economic situation brought on by the pandemic, those were also suspended from FY19 through FY 2022. And the graph in the upper left shows that that was about a $6 million forfeiture of revenues. So these are the key events that are impacting us here today. Flat revenues, loss of industrial load, major cost increases, supply chain lead time increases, which exacerbates costs, and the need to draw from available fund balances to meet the city's operating costs. Finally, the rating agencies have voiced concerns. So the top graph shows how the electric revenues have been basically flat since 2018. You'll see that turquoise top of the bar, and then there's purple on top of that. That's what's called the production cost adjustment. And then the purple, the dark purple on the way top, that's from Winter Storm Uri. So the reason I've changed the colors of those your base revenues are those dark blue bars. And if you look at those, you can see they dipped in 2020, but essentially they've remained flat. Because the PCA, or production cost adjustment, that's just a pass-through. You know, you have to pay that expense. You don't get to use it for operation or anything. So you've had flat revenues. The lower graph shows a loss of industrial load. And that's a pretty, industrial load are these, massive power users. You had 4 when we did the last study. And so that impacts your revenues greatly. Now, hopefully, we'll get more, we'll replace that load. But at the time of this study, you don't have that load. Inflation. So this graph, the dark line is the 12-month rolling average. And you can see that since 2019, it hit 8% or more even 9%. And so not only is, luckily it's coming down right now, but you're still living with the ramifications of that. It doesn't just disappear overnight. And we'll talk a little bit about actual cost increases. But this is, impacting the cost you have of doing business for the electric department. The production cost adjustment recovers wholesale power cost changes and fuel changes. And you can see that too has had this increasing trend. And, although it's not as high, it isn't coming down as fast either. General fund transfer. So the dark blue bars are the actual transfers made since 2013. The turquoise bars on the right are the projected future transfers, which exhibit an increasing trend. Labor costs. So, like everything else, the cost of labor has also gone up. This is national labor numbers. The turquoise bar shows all labor, which is increasing, but utility labor rates are even higher. They don't mirror each other perfectly, but they tend to be higher. So that increases the cost of maintaining and running your operation. Health insurance cost increases 44% between fiscal year 17 and 2023, nearly 30% in the last 3 years. Now, another exacerbating factor, the city wasn't passing that through to its employees, so it wasn't recovering that cost increase due to the fact that they had suspended cost of living adjustments. So up until July of this year, the city was absorbing that. This shows what's really happened to distribution material costs. It's quite shocking. I have to say, I've done this for many, many years, and this slide, makes you take pause. The upper left graph, that's a 500 kVA, 480 volt pad mount. It was about $12,000, 2021. It's over $40,000 in not even 3 years. And all, everything else in these other charts, cable. These are the materials needed to run your business. I mean, this is how you get electricity to your constituents. And the costs are just staggering. You can't really plan for 200% increases.
So that's a transformer. So
okay.
it's taken 12,470 volts, stepped it down to 480 volts so we can serve our customers. There's pad mount transformers and there's those that are hanging on poles.
Got it. Thank you very much.
And then supply chain lead time increases. And this is, important because it delays your ability to do projects. It delays, your ability to respond to unexpected changes. It also increases overtime costs. It just increases the cost of everything when everything takes longer to get. Drawing on the available funds balance. So this chart shows that from, fiscal year 18 to 23, there's been a trend of drawing down fund balances to meet operating costs for the city. And it's projected to continue. And by FY25, you're getting to a really ill-advised balance, I would say. But
What funds are you showing on that graph there? Like which specific funds?
I think it's a general fund and I think you have something called your available fund balance. I'll defer to Christy.
So these are the unrestricted and undesignated funds in the SUA operating fund that we rely on to transfer to the city to support operations. Now, I will say that I believe that these numbers include those one-time capital draws that we did, but in the later years, that was for some to meet operational needs.
But it does not include like the rate stabilization fund.
Correct.
That's separate.
Correct. If
There's-
it has any sort of restriction or designation on the funds, it is not included here.
Yeah, just so, I mean, we've had this conversation, but just for the larger audience, when we had $25 million in the bank of unrestricted funds, that's our citizens' money that's sitting in the bank not being spent on things that citizens need. And so we have intentionally chosen to spend that money down because we need to spend it on things that people need. This is not, I think what concerns me is that people look at this and go, well, wait, this is the restricted funds or the stuff, the rainy day stuff that we've set aside. That's not what this money is, in general. Now, we don't want to spend it all the way to zero, but we're also choosing as a council, we have chosen in those years to spend that money on stuff that it needs to be spent on. And so I just, I want to caution people from looking at that and going, well, we're using up the money that we need to as the rainy day or when we need to stabilize rate or whatever. I mean, that's certainly we want to correct that. I'd rather see that fund stay a little higher. But this is council choices to spend money on things we need.
Yes, and I think part of the takeaway is that it just needs to levelize.
Yes.
And not
I would
continue
rather that
to-
doesn't continue to drop.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
And the rating agencies have noticed that they pay attention to something called the fixed charge coverage ratio. And yours has declined due to higher purchase power costs, Winter Storm Uri, the transfers to the from SUA to the general fund, and then they've specifically noted a lack of rate increases. So that could affect your rating, and a downgraded rating affects your costs, which increase. So changing gears to the actual study itself. And this is just a little 101 on what is a cost of service and rate design study. So there's 3 basic steps. First, you establish the revenue requirement, and that can be thought of as, how much money do I need to operate? Then you take that revenue requirement and sort it into different buckets, if you will. The first bucket is functionally. You say, this is what I spend on distribution. This is what I spend on power. This is what I spend on customer costs. And then for each of those buckets, you sort them again into fixed versus variable. Which costs are fixed, which are variable. The goal of all this is so that by the time you get to designing rates, you're using fixed charges to recover fixed costs and variable charges to recover variable costs. And that is then rate design. And I'll talk a little bit about the additional things that go into rate design. So this schematic is kind of a layout of how it all happens. The upper left dark blue boxes show the major components of the revenue requirement. Not really appearing there as power costs, but they should be there. The lower boxes, the gold boxes, show the other side. So this is like the first big analysis of a cost of service and rate design study. You figure out your revenue requirement, and then you look at your customer usage historically by customer class and run it through your current rate structure and say, how much money will I get under my current rate structures? You also add in non-rate revenues. Those are typically pole attachment fees if you have property you rent out. It's any money that the utility makes not in its core line of business. So you compare those two numbers and determine, am I projected to over-recover, which is the situation in the last rate study. It wasn't necessarily an over-recovery, but it wasn't an under-recovery. In this study, it's a projected under-recovery. And then on the right side of the chart is the factors that go into rate design. The math is one part of it, but then you have to take into account initiatives. For example, you might have a special rate for senior citizens. You might have a special rate for churches. You might want to, incentivize certain behaviors through rate. You might have a rate that makes charging your EV really cheap at night, so that load doesn't happen during the day. Things like that. All those go into rate design. And so some of it is, policy decisions. I'll be talking a bit, you'll hear the term test year. And the test year is the, magical kind of concept around which rates are designed. And you determine the test year by taking your actual operating and capital budget. So in this study, we used your FY24 budget. So those are real numbers. Those are audited numbers. You adjust them for known and measurable changes. So this study covered 5 years. We took the current budget, and then we said, well, what's different? What's going to happen in the next 5 years that's going to impact those numbers up or down? And put those things together, you get what's called the test year. So this is how we go from the left, which is your FY 2024 budget, to the right, which is the revenue requirement for FY 2025. Your current budget is around $58 million. We have just under $3 million of increases to that budget, resulting in a revenue requirement of $61 million. You can see at the top under O&M, there's an increase in the projected cost of power. Your wholesale provider is increasing their costs. There's an increase in O&M. Some of that is the health insurance increases we talked about and labor costs. So that's about $1.5 million. The middle area is the increase to the general fund. And also, somebody mentioned earlier the rate stabilization fund. So that is the fund that is used to fund most of the capital improvement projects for the electric utility. And it's been getting about a $4 million transfer historically. When we did this study and looked at the upcoming expenditures, in part because of those cost increases I talked about, it really needs to be more like $5 million.
Help me understand here just 1 second. The test year, is FY24 the test year, FY25? I'm struggling with where the test year is.
The test year is FY 2025.
Okay, thanks.
But
Yes.
it's based on 24.
Okay.
And then finally, at the bottom, we look at other revenues, which we're projecting a $500,000 increase in those. So that's an offset to the money that you would need. When you compare that to your revenues at current rates, we're projecting about a $2.9 million deficit, which is about just under 5%. When you carry that out for the 5-year period, it grows to 5.9%. I mean, 5.9 million, 10%, if no changes are made. And also, if the conditions, if inflation stays around 3%, if your industrial load doesn't grow appreciably. We're trying to predict the future, and I will tell you, after doing studies for nearly 30 years, it's a really hard time right now. There's so much going on in the world that, but our best guess and our prudent recommendation is that if all other things equal, you will be running continuous deficits and action should be taken. The cumulative loss would be $21.7 million, not adjusted for inflation. That's just adding those numbers up. So, what to do? My recommendation is you need to increase your fixed charges to align with the cost of service. COS, that you'll see a lot in my presentation, I understand that means City of Stillwater to you. Tonight it's cost of service. So if there's confusion, I apologize for that. The second bullet, which I'll briefly mention here, but I'll talk about and explain what I mean because it sounds like, Greek probably. I'm recommending you eliminate the declining block rate billing structure. That's a billing structure that you have for a couple of your customer classes, including your residential class, where after a certain consumption in a month in winter, they get a big discount in the rate they pay. So I'm recommending that be eliminated. Similarly, some of your power and industrial classes get a seasonal discount in winter on the demand charge of their bill. I'm recommending that be eliminated as well. For your small commercial general service class, that can be thought of as like insurance companies, small restaurants, your small commercial. They are the one class that's the most out of line with cost of service, which is not uncommon in a study like this. They're a hard class to predict because they look a lot like residential customers, but they're not. They use a lot more power, they use it in a different way. So in these studies, they tend to be a little out of alignment, but in addition to being out of alignment with cost of service, they're out of alignment with other utilities in the area. So we're recommending we bring that gap closer. And then finally, the recommendation is to implement the rates January 1st, 2024, which would be before FY25. And this would be the result. So talking a little bit about rate design. As a municipal utility, can you charge whatever you want? It's a fair question, right? You don't have competitors. Well, the answer is no, you can't. James Bombright is the seminal resource on the principles of public utility rate making. He wrote the seminal book in 1961, and no one's actually bested it since. And there's been a lot of litigation, there's been a lot of regulation. What it all boils down to is that a municipal utility is allowed to charge its cost to serve plus a reasonable margin. So that's why we do a cost of service study. Bombright also came up with 8 principles to consider when you're designing rates. First, rates should be practical. Second, they should be uncontroversial as to interpretation. Basically, that means that as one of your customers, I should be able to understand how you're calculating my bill. They need to be effective in meeting your revenue requirements. You need to be able to rely on those rates to pay your bills. They need to be stable. You need to be able to plan. You need to know how much is expected to come in. The flip side is your customers need to know how much their bill is going to be from month to month, so they need to be stable from a rate perspective. They need to be fair among customer classes. 7, they need to avoid undue discrimination. That's one of my favorite points because it basically admits you're going to discriminate. So absent massive growth, like in the past, utilities had massive load growth. That was just a thing. Well, that's not the case anymore, and it's not the case for all rate classes anymore. And so absent massive growth, it's a zero-sum game. If one group pays less, somebody else pays more, within reason. And then finally, rates should be efficient economically. And that just means if something's too cheap, you use too much of it. But electricity being, a necessity, if it's too expensive for your basic needs, that's wrong as well. So these are all the things we're trying to do here. And this slide kind of sums it up, that there's a lot of trade-offs and tension. Everybody wants low rates, but they want the power to be on. They don't want outages. They want simple rates, but simplicity often comes at the cost of accuracy. The more complicated a rate, the more accurate it is. Equity and fairness are in the eye of the beholder sometimes. Some people who really are pro-sustainability see costs differently than people who are maybe on a fixed budget. Regulations, initiatives. Finally, ability and willingness to pay is a very, very important concept. It basically means if someone has the ability to pay more and is willing to pay more, you should let them. This usually comes up with industrial customers. So again, we're back to the cost of service. This slide takes that $61 million revenue requirement and breaks it down into those buckets I talked about by customer class. So production, which is, power generation, distribution, and then customer charges. So looking at the residential class, what you'll see is that of that $33 million cost of service, only $10.7 million is variable. So it really, utilities are pretty much fixed cost entities by and large. And so in your residential rates, you're recovering all that with a small customer charge and everything else is variable. So that's a mismatch. When we take your current rates and run your usage through your current rates and compare it to the cost of service, it projects about a 5% deficit. So again, back to the 5 bullets, these are the recommendations I'm making. Increase your fixed charges, eliminate the declining block structure, the seasonal demand charges, align your small commercial class, and implement on January 1st. So this slide talks about the declining rate billing structure. On the left, that first bar shows the cost of service rate at 955 kilowatt hours for a residential customer. That's the average usage for your residential customers right now. Rates are designed around the average. So at any, at really low use or really high use, you may get some anomalies, but you have to design around the average. So the average is 955 kilowatt hours a month. And that left bar shows that turquoise is the fixed cost component. This is just energy, so it doesn't include the PCA and doesn't include the customer charge. It's just around $100 a month, and then that dark blue is the variable portion. So for your average customer, you need to be making about $100 a month to cover your costs. The second bar shows 600 kilowatt hours of usage. At 600 kilowatt hours of usage, you're not even recovering your full fixed cost from that customer. As you go one bar right to the 955 kilowatt hour customer, you're recovering all your fixed costs, but you're not recovering all your variable costs. And then if you go to the far right, at a high using customer, you'll see that you're recovering all your fixed and variable costs, and there's that little gold part on top, and that actually represents over recovery. And that's kind of the concept behind declining block structures, right? That if you're recovering fixed and variable costs in one charge, at a certain point you're overcharging. But your 600 kilowatt hour tier level is not consistent with your current usage patterns. I believe that's been in place for 30 years. So a lot has changed in 30 years. Your average usage now is 955 kilowatt hours. In a rate design like this, you would usually set your tier at the average use or slightly above the average use. And right now, 45% to 70% of customers are in that tier, depending on a given month.
Are in what tier? What tier are they in? They're in the 600.
The second,
Okay.
Over 600. And so typically, that's not what you would see in the data if it's a properly designed tier system. The bulk of your use should be in that first block. This rate structure is inconsistent with sustainability. It's kind of an archaic rate structure. What's more typical is an inclining block structure where you get penalized for using too much. So again, that not only is the tier wrong, just the whole concept of this is pretty archaic, and it doesn't line up with sustainability goals. It subsidizes high usage. And by removing this, we need to have less of an overall rate increase. So you get a lot of bang for your buck eliminating this. And this slide just also demonstrates how the tiers look. On the left, the 600 kilowatt hour tier where you're not collecting your full cost of service until you get to that high usage, and a more properly set tier on the right, which is how you typically expect to see it. So the general service small commercial class also has a declining block structure that we're proposing to eliminate. The seasonal demand differential is for larger customers, and it's on their demand charge. They get a cheaper charge in winter, but that's not based on cost of service. That's not how Stillwater pays for its power. It may be, in some cases, impacting competitiveness because your summer charge is really punitive. It's really high, and your winter charge is below cost of service. And so industrial and large user demand is getting more all on, all off. You're not seeing, the patterns we used to see historically in the way power was used. So it's out of alignment. So these are the proposed rates. This chart is for the residential service. The first column is your existing rate structure. So you'll see that in summer, customers pay about 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour. In winter, after they use 600 kilowatt hours, that charge drops to 6.7 cents. Cost of service is in the next column, and it shows that the customer charge should be around $24 a month, and that the energy charge is around 10.4 cents a kilowatt hour. And again, that energy charge is recovering all the fixed costs and all the variable costs. So the proposed rate, and again, we're proposing a 5-year transition. So in the 5 years to work that customer charge closer to cost of service, so starting with a $1.90 per month increase in January 2024, the summer electric rate doesn't increase very much. Where you see the biggest increase is in that second tier. This shows at different levels of consumption how bills are impacted. The kind of hatched blue bar shows your summer existing rate. The dark solid blue bar shows that winter rate. The turquoise bar shows our proposed rate, and that purple shows the cost of service. And again, you'll see that around 955 kilowatt hours is the average usage, and that's where everything, your cost of service is closely aligned with your proposed rate. You're designing around the average. As you go to the right, you can see how that second tier really impacts the rate. Like at 1555 kilowatt hours, you see the differential between the summer and winter rate. This slide shows how your current and proposed rates stack up with comparators, peer utilities. One qualification I want to make, this is a very conservative representation. The challenge here is the production cost adjustment, which right now is really high. It's like, 2 to 3 cents and sometimes 5 cents. And each of these utilities handles that charge differently. So a lot of these utilities haven't really, this is based on public information available from their website. A lot of them haven't changed their rates in quite a while. And they have these very volatile production cost adjustments that can vary by 7 cents. It can be 7 cents one month and 0 the next. So this is conservative. I mean, I don't like to, make things look better than they are, but I caveat that this is, conservative where the production cost adjustment is, and it assumes about a 2.5 cent kilowatt hour charge, which is significant. So based on that, under your current rates in summer, a 955 kilowatt hour customer would spend about $142. In winter, they'd spend about $125 under current rates. The blended rate is $132. We're proposing a rate of $144, whether it's summer, whether it's winter, at 955 kilowatt hours of usage. This shows the rate path that we're proposing. So again, the first set of bars are your current rates. 2025, it would go up to 144, and then by 2029, it would be $152 for an average residential customer. Again, this is based on a 2.5 cent production cost adjustment, which is unusually high. This is the same information for your small commercial class. Their existing rates can be seen. They have that declining block structure at a different kilowatt hour level. Their cost of service is in the middle, and the proposed rate is to remove that structure and to start to decrease their rates to bring them in alignment. This is the same information that kind of shows, you know, where their rates are now and where the cost of service and the proposed rates are. And then this slide shows them versus comparators. And this is one of the most compelling, that, you know, we really want to bring them more into alignment with peers. And this is the proposed rate path to do that. Finally, this is your Power and Light secondary class, which can be thought of as your Walmarts. They have a winter, they have that differential in their demand charge between summer and winter that can be seen here, and we're recommending that that be removed. We're also giving them a slight decrease in the energy charge to kind of compensate for that demand charge change. This is how their rates stack up at different levels of usage. Their average use is 37,600 kilowatt hours a month. And then this is them compared to other utilities in the area. Again, all these numbers are based on an assumption of a high production cost adjustment that isn't comparable or the same between utilities. I did the best I could. And this is the rate path. And again, the base rate is actually increasing, but you don't see it in this slide because of the impact of the PCA, because this is such a large load. So, to recap, costs have increased dramatically since I was here last. $3 million for the test year, and about $800,000 a year after that, if all things stay consistent. Current rate revenues are not sufficient, and the rating agencies have voiced concerns. So again, the recommendations and questions.
Well, thank you, Lisa. This is a ton of information, and I know a lot of work has gone into it over the last, well, really few years since we did the last one. So at this point, councilors, questions, comments, or questions for Lisa.
I had one question just to make sure I understood. On, I want to say it's page 36, but it also says page 40 of 82 at the bottom, which I think is our whole agenda. So page 36 of your presentation, where it gave the chart, the graph of the residential service.
Is this it?
Yes.
Okay.
So just to make sure I understand this correctly, I'm looking at, so I like my house to be really, really cool in the summertime. So I'm looking at like the 1555 kilowatt section. And so what this is saying is essentially the rate increase would make my bill all year round the same as it is in the summer.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly.
So, Lisa, the 29, page 29, which shows the different classes and kind of their over and under. And I know this is based on current rates, so these numbers would change with the different rates. But certainly the commercial class seems to bear
That's a small commercial, yeah.
That's the small commercial, yeah. But that I mean, they, and then their charts on whatever later we recover for them more than it costs to serve them.
Well, there's a couple anomalies here. So again, this is the class that's really tricky in a study like this, because even though they look a lot like residential customers, they don't behave like residential customers. Also, you'll see that they're currently, their cost of service is 5.8 million, which is small. So, right, so being off by a couple million in that class looks huge. But when there's, 270 customers, you know what I'm gonna say? So they are, probably paying more than their cost of service. I wouldn't necessarily think it's 43%.
I understand that, but they are the only group that's paying what looks to be significantly more than their cost of service.
Yeah.
And is that a rate design?
It just
thing?
means
Is
you
that just
haven't
here?
had changes in a long time, to me. And then you've had cost increases. And so, it's kind of like that. A good example is that residential 600 kilowatt hours, that was set maybe 30 years ago. Over those 30 years, the way people use energy has changed. The makeup of the different classes has changed. So, your industrial class was covering a lot more of your cost of service for the last study, and that's gone away.
Okay. So we're not, and that's not something that you look for in rate design to try. I mean, that class is not treated differently for a reason. It's just the way it works in this.
That's one of the things, all the competing different factors.
Yeah.
One thing is the math, but yet no one charges pure cost of service, right? And so one factor that comes into play when I see, industrial load disappearing, then I'm like, well, what's going on? And then I see, how are you relative to your peers, right? Are your costs in line with what other people are charging? Because if everybody else is charging below cost, you don't have to do that. That's a policy call, but that's something that I would flag. The other challenge is just, predicting. Like at this point in time, I can't assign cost to load that isn't here. If that load shows up, I can assign cost to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so my last question is in the comps with our not really competitors, but the other people around us. Are those comparisons just looking at the rates charged without additional charges that get put on some of those bills? I mean, and how do you? I've tried to look into comparing these before, and it's really hard to try to figure out.
It's really hard. It is really hard. So it's the fairest representation I can make, given that all these rates are different. Different municipalities charge for different charges. I've tried to peel out like fire charges. Yeah. But if they're over collecting on fire and subsidizing their electric utility, so it's inherently difficult.
Okay. So, but things like franchise fees that cities would charge, or different tax rates that get paid in different cities?
For the co-ops, I did account for franchise fees.
Okay.
Or taxes, because that's part of your bill. That's like 2% or something that's tacked on.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to go back to your slide number 31. Walk me through this in one more time.
Okay. So the first bar is at 955 kilowatt hours, energy only. You should be getting $100 a month to cover your costs. Okay. 70 something of that is fixed, and then the blue on top is variable.
Got that.
Okay. So then when you step one over, for a customer who's only using 600 kilowatt hours a month, they're paying maybe around $70.
Right.
And so they're not even paying their full fixed cost.
Correct. The third and fourth bars is where I'm struggling.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So then the third bar is at, average usage of 955 kilowatt hours under your current rate structure. You're not recovering you're not getting $100 a month from that client currently.
That's where I was understanding. Okay. And the fourth?
And the fourth is that for higher users, actually you're slightly over recovering your cost.
Thank you. Now I'm with you. Maybe.
Well, the concern is that you're not recovering your cost on your average customer.
Right. Thank you.
So on slide 35, The cost of service rate, the $24, and then the 0.104 for kilowatts per hour. Why are we looking at it? Because basically the proposed rates basically lower the customer charge, but increase the kilowatts per hour.
No, it increases both.
Well, I'm sorry, it decreases it from the cost of service.
Right.
So-
we're phasing it in over 5 years.
So, okay, that's,
It's higher than it is today, but we're
Right.
not hitting them with the full $14.
okay. Thank you.
Or
That's,
$13.61.
thank you.
So in general, the idea is that we're increasing that fixed rate, so it's not, and then we're also increasing the variable, right, based on how much power you use, but that is, it's, I don't want to say better, but you're advising us to, that fixed rate is a better rate for us to adjust more substantively.
Right. Now, if you go back to, let me figure out which slide it was where I talked about the buckets. Oh, I think it was the where I showed that really the residential, here, this slide. So you see that only, only $10.7 million of the $33 million cost of service is variable. And yet, the customer charge, which is that $24, is recovering that fixed customer component. So that's just that column, the second to right column. The remaining balance is currently being recovered by a variable charge for your residential customer class.
So the $12, the rates you're showing on that slide we were just looking at, which now I'm not, that's the rate that would go into effect January of 2024, and then that number gets bumped up.
And then every year it
over-
works
okay.
up. And currently we're trying to get to $24 by FY29. And actually a lot of your, several of your comparators have higher customer charges than that currently.
Lisa,
Go ahead.
yep.
Go ahead.
Can you give clarity to the mayor's point on the customer class for the general commercial, which is a lot of our Main Street businesses, downtown businesses? One of your recommendation was that they were one of the classes that needed alignment. Can you just clarify that is actually like decreasing?
Oh, yes, yeah, that's decreasing their rates. And hopefully that will be incentive, that'll be an economic development benefit as well.
Yeah. For sure.
Okay, so on page 45, we're going to be pretty much in the middle of the pack, it looks like. And do you have any clue what other people are thinking in terms of where their rates are headed? Are we going to be in the middle of the pack, or are we going to be high, low when everybody settles out with
Well, I don't
their
have a crystal ball.
post-pandemic adjustments, right?
I don't have a crystal ball, but yeah. So part of the reason that when you get to the secondary power and light class and when you get to the industrial class, you really have to look at competition because those are the customers that can leave, right? Residential customers can leave to some extent, but by and large, they're not going to, all other things being equal. So, that ability and willingness to pay criteria, sometimes it means you can charge industrial customers more. Other times it means you might have to cut them a deal to keep them in your territory because they bring jobs, they bring other benefits. So these two classes are kind of tricky, and what we have seen in the time I've worked with Stillwater, we've seen some pretty aggressive pricing by some of your comparators to attract large loads. So this rate design is meant to keep you solvent and be prudent, but also bear in mind, that you want to try to keep those rates as low as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, that kind of goes to a question I was thinking is, do you know when the last time some of these folks adjusted their rates were? Is
I
that part of
don't.
your-
And so a lot of these rates appear to be somewhat old. But yeah, again, a lot of these production cost adjustments seem to be, fulfilling that, they haven't changed their core rates, but you've got this wildly fluctuating charge that normally should be, a penny or under a penny, and is now like 7 cents. The other thing that the data shows is that Oklahoma Gas and Electric and PSO, Public Service of Oklahoma, are really going after industrial loads. They've realigned their rate structures, and they're down under 6 cents a kilowatt hour all in, which would be below cost for Stillwater.
These numbers don't show winter storm adjustment though either, do they? Because I
No,
know
that
PSO and
that
OG&E
would be fulfilled in 2024.
Well, I mean, it's not for them, for our competitors
Oh,
here.
no, for PSO and OG&E, yes, because it's an ongoing charge. Their PCAs are like a page long. I mean, they've got, but yeah, it includes a lot of that. I mean, I was pretty shocked when I pulled the number and I triple checked it and then I checked it again, because this is different. When I looked at this, I looked at it in 2018, I looked at it in 2019 for different reasons for different customers in Oklahoma, and they were kind of expensive and kind of lazy. It seems like they've changed their business.
What else, counselors?
It's always so challenging having these discussions and thinking about raising rates with our customers and how we balance all the things that we need to run our utility with the excellence of service that we have always done. But I do really appreciate and value the work that you all do to bring us this information to understand what it truly costs us to provide these services. I think that there's a lot of words in here that are really probably challenging for the average person to kind of cut through. We're not used to looking at our utility bills maybe in that way. But I do think it's so important, that transparency in what it actually costs us to provide those services, and our ability to kind of equalize and balance, whether it's with fixed costs so that they can plan for that. Certainly as we went through the pandemic and made decisions to hold rates so that people that were experiencing the burden of lost jobs and stalled jobs and all the things weren't experiencing those rate increases on top of it. It's a delayed issue for us from a cost of service and rates.
Well, and if it makes you feel better, a lot of clients that I work with and a lot of customers I know, myself included, utilities have had emergency rate increases. Like I'm in Orlando Utilities Commission is a public power utility. They had 2 or 3 emergency rate increases during this period. So, you made it through, but now, things have to be adjusted, I think.
I think it's important to note, I mean, I appreciated that you not just talked about the cost for energy, but also all those costs that go with it. And so the supply chain and the health insurance, and there's all sorts of nuances that have to be figured in when you're talking about how you set a rate that will cover all the expenses. And so I think that's a really important piece to have pointed out, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Go ahead. One more question. I just did want to go back to the funds, because I think that's something we know as council and staff kind of how those work a little bit better, but I think as we're talking and trying to kind of illuminate the subject, it's important to understand that we do have, and maybe, I don't know, Christy or Lauren, maybe you can speak to a little bit. I mean, I know we went through a process of establishing kind of fund balances where we wanted certain, I don't know if the rate stabilization fund has kind of a fund balance? You suggested that we
Right,
had been at 4, you're
Right. The rate
recommending
stabilization
5.
fund had been at 4 million. And when we ran the numbers, we didn't change that initially. And we were, getting these like consistent $1 million deficits. So finally, and it's a balancing account. The rate stabilization fund is meant to kind of balance out some of the volatility, right? So the way the financial model works is in the earlier years you actually collect a little more, but that goes into the rate stabilization fund to keep it at the level it needs to be over that 5-year horizon.
Was the 4 million what was going in, and we need to put 5 million in, or was that, Christy, the goal or kind of the amount that we had established that we want to have in that rate? Was that so? Is it the amount actually going in, or is it the amount that we want to go in, or both?
You have been putting
I don't mind stepping in. Yeah, the 4 million is what we had been transferring into the rate stabilization fund each year for probably the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. It was a little bit more than that prior to, because the amount was calculated in a different way. We went to a set dollar amount annually, and we just haven't reevaluated or adjusted that figure in a number of years. And the model was clearly showing that it was time to make some sort of adjustment to that.
I know when we originally looked at some of these, like widespread across, as we were trying to establish where there were extra funds that really needed to be deployed for the benefit of the community rather than kind of sit and wait to be deployed. Is there a policy that we need to adjust for that rate stabilization fund amount to go up? Is there an evaluation of those funds kind of across the board? Do we have a set schedule for those? I just think it's important it sounds kind of scary when you show that graph and it's like, oh, and it's depleting, but we do have
Emergency reserves, I think,
right.
is
So,
the
right,
word you're
if a
looking
tornado
for.
came
Yes,
through, right, we
yes.
have funds that we're not, yes, we want that to equalize, but there are, it's not betting the whole bank, I guess, is what I'm trying to.
Yes, so we have separate emergency reserves for each utility that are established, and those have been in place for a number of years. We don't have a formal policy adopted. Staff has made an attempt to draft a policy. I would like to bring it before the council at some point. I think it needs to be reviewed again because it's been sitting in draft form for a couple of years now. But that is a project in the works. But we do have those emergency reserves that are intended to come into play whenever we have those catastrophic events. And that chart, this graph here is not emergency reserves. That is completely separate.
I think that's important. And just as an example, when the winter storm Uri came through, it was the rate stabilization fund that allowed us to offset some of the costs to the community as a true rate stabilization, right, for our community and customers.
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah. Which is, what we want it there for.
So I've got kind of a question for council here. We're going to have to go to town halls to present this, right? Or somebody's going to have to. And how are we going to do that? I can't imagine presenting these charts and graphs to the citizenry. We've got to break it down somehow to the point like, here's what your bill's going to look like now, and here's what your bill's going to look like in the future, and what each of these line items cover. For a low user, a medium user, for a high user, especially the residential folks. It's got to be, not that what you presented is not clear,
No offense
but
taken.
it's got to be more understandable for me. Okay? Look at my bill.
Agree completely. Yeah, staff is tonight. We're going to be giving you some dates. We put out a release last week on some dates for our schedule for the next month. That includes tonight's study session, which we're looking at electric and stormwater. Next week, city council meeting, we'll be looking at water and wastewater presentations. The following week, we'll have 2 town halls in person and on Zoom here at City Hall, and those meetings we're going to have examples of bills for the average residential, average commercial, and so that will give more clarity to where the proposed average bills will be sitting, and then we'll be bringing that back to council on the 16th.
Thank you. You're
for
ahead of me.
discussion.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
And I would encourage you to do more than just average bills, but above average bills,
Yes,
below average
yeah.
bills. I think you have to have a range of those so people can connect to them.
Yeah, we'll bring a matrix. Yeah. Yep.
Perfect.
Matrix, my eyes just glazed over again.
No, like a grid. Excel. You're an IM. It's an Excel spreadsheet. Yeah.
Lisa, I had one more question. And I might be remembering wrong, but I believe the last time we did a rate study, there were options. You could increase rates this way. You could increase rates this way. We're not seeing that as a recommendation this time around. Is it that we just aren't able to recover costs unless, like, this is the bare minimum that we can do to get to a sustainable base?
Yeah, basically. So last time, because you were covering your costs, even though, you know, the study said you were collecting a little too much from one class and not enough from another, you were making yourself whole. And so that gave you a lot of discretion in what you did or didn't want to do. You know, these are pretty dramatic cost increases and revenue shortfalls. I mean, you can do nothing. I mean, these are recommendations. You know, the challenge with a study like this is, you know, the cost drivers are such that if you're not paying those costs, you're probably not going to be firing people. So you're going to be deferring capital investment, or you're going to reduce, you know, transfers to the general fund. You're going to be, you know, making decisions that may be okay in the short run, but, you know, there's plenty of examples in the news that I don't have to cite here about what happens if you just continuously put off needed rate increases, because eventually the infrastructure fails, and it often fails catastrophically.
Yeah, I think that's important as we're understanding as a council and as we're messaging and communicating and engaging the community. I think an understanding of that is really important. That needs to be a part of the conversation.
What else? Anything for Lisa? Thank you so much, Lisa, for being
Thank
here.
you
and
so
for the work
much.
that you've
It's
done.
a
Yeah.
pleasure to be here.
Good to see you again.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, just to recap and
Yes,
let
sir.
you go. Yes, we do have some future events coming up that we have planned. Just to reiterate what Brady said, please mark your calendar and follow this link, stillwaterok.gov/rate study. All this information will be on that site, as well as a link to the Zoom Town Hall meeting on Tuesday, October the 10th, 5:30. Lisa will present again. That's great input to try to simplify some things. But it's also a good time for the public to ask questions direct, and we encourage questions to come in. Please email them to us. We can get you an answer, and I believe you can do that on the website as well for our customers. We'll be back here on the 16th, October the 16th council meeting, presentation of the average residential and commercial utility bills reflecting proposed rates. Christy and Dana, I understand, are going to do that. And then hopefully the meeting Monday, 11/6 of 23, we'll come back with electric rate design, the recommendation, the actual resolution and recommendation if everything goes well. So we have a lot of things planned for the next month or so, and we look forward to hearing all the questions and getting them answered. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lauren. This is a ton of work from staff and from Lisa and her team and everyone, and we want to acknowledge that and appreciate the fact that you guys are making sure that this is as clean and clear and well presented and as transparent as possible. And so that's we certainly appreciate that from the staff. All right, we'll move to item 2B at this time and discuss a stormwater rate study. And Zach Henson is here to kick us off.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. It is a pleasure to be here today. Let me get my presentation up real quick. All right, so I'm going to talk to you tonight about the stormwater drainage fee. You've had a lot of numbers thrown at you tonight. I'm going to throw a few more. Hopefully, it's not going to be as long. I'll try to be as brief as I can. Not to say disparaging remarks, but I understand. Anyway, I'm going to kick this off with just a brief discussion about stormwater. Anytime I talk about stormwater, I want to make sure that everybody understands what I'm talking about. So this is going to be runoff generated during storm events and snow and ice melts. There is a direct correlation between impervious area and the amount of runoff that is generated. So as still water grows, impervious area is going to increase, and therefore we're going to be generating more runoff. And the primary goal of stormwater management in general is to protect life and property while maintaining compliance with federal and state regulations regarding water quality as well as water quantity. And this is a fairly good image here. You can see all the pipes on the left hand of the image. Those are going to the wastewater treatment facility that's coming from our bathrooms, our sinks, floor drains, and things like that. That water all gets treated before being released back into the creeks. And then all the stormwater runoff just goes into a storm sewer, goes straight into our lakes, creeks, streams, untreated. And therefore, we've got that water quality aspect that we have to watch out for. So tonight, I'm going to provide a general overview of how the stormwater program is currently funded, the program needs, and what we need to do to better serve Stillwater's residents and comply with regulatory agencies. So our current drainage fee was established in 1997. It was designed to provide funding for drainage facilities and stormwater projects. The current rates for that fee are residential properties are billed $1 per month, and commercial properties are billed based on the amount of impervious area using an equivalent residential unit tiered structure. And that's kind of a mouthful. I can go into detail if you want to know how that works, but it takes a second, so we can kind of pass through it at this point in time.
Zach, can you
Yeah.
just explain? I mean, when you say impervious area, I think parking lots. Is
Yes,
that
yes, absolutely.
basically what it is, or there
Hard
more
surfaces where rainwater will not infiltrate into the ground. So
It
water
doesn't-
hits it, becomes runoff.
Parking lots, rooftops.
Rooftops,
All those
absolutely.
kinds of things. What about
Driveways,
gravel?
garden sheds.
Like if you have a gravel
Gravel
parking lot,
can
is
be, it's one of those in-betweens, because if it's loose gravel, some will infiltrate into the ground, but if it's like a driveway that's used all the time or a county road, it's so compacted that it acts as an impervious surface.
So for commercial properties, somebody goes out and determines how much impervious surface there is?
Yes, we use satellite imagery and aerial imagery. We've got a great GIS group with the City of Stillwater. They put this onto a very easy to read layer that I can pop it open and look at exactly what the square footage is for a property. So,
Okay, thanks.
yes. Essentially, we've had no change to this fee since 1997, so that's 26 years of the exact same fee. Increases were considered in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, and again in 2020. I don't have any documentation regarding why no action was taken for the 2018, 2019, and 2012. I can tell you that in 2014, going back and watching the video, there was a lot of emphasis placed on floodplain management to try to get that increase. And the council at that time had a hard time justifying it because not everybody in Stillwater lives within a FEMA regulatory floodplain. Now in 2020, we brought it to you. This is when we were at the community center doing meetings. And of course, no action was taken at that time due to the economic hardships that were going on due to the health crisis at that time. But it's in serious need of being revamped. So in general, this fee generates $310,000 annually. And you can see here where that revenue goes to these different funds. And each of these funds are currently subsidized by general funds, transportation funds, operations funds, or available grants that we're able to apply for. But the drainage fee alone does not cover the actual costs associated with these different funds. So, to take a look at some of what the other cities are doing in Oklahoma, we've got this great chart here. Stillwater at the top, you can see the residential monthly fee in the third column, and then non-residential, which is going to be your commercial fees. If you compare us just to the next highest or more expensive community is going to be Muskogee. We pay $1 here. Residents of Muskogee will pay $2.96. For the purpose of this slide, I wrote 50 cents per ERU for our rate. I had to do a little bit of math. Basically, with our tiered structure, you could break it down to roughly 50 cents per ERU is what we charge. So if you take that as an example, a commercial property in Stillwater that has a rating of 10 ERUs is going to pay $5 a month for their fee. A similar commercial property in Muskogee with the same impervious area is going to pay roughly $56 a month. So significantly higher, both in residential and non-residential.
And that's because the rate's higher and the ERU area is smaller?
Yes, that's right. So good catch on that previous slide. Yes, our ERU rating is 5,000 square feet. The intention of that was to look at the average impervious area associated with a residential property. 5,000 is really high. For the average in Stillwater, it's a lot closer to 2,500, 2,600. So the fact that it's at 5,000 is also a little bit of a hindrance to being a really accurate fee. And this is just a nifty graph that actually has a little more punch to it. You can see Stillwater down there at the bottom. This is just for the residential fee. The average, looking at all those comparisons cities, is $4.91. So we're right there at the bottom. So just to talk about some of the stormwater needs, why do we even need this program? First, we've got capital projects. We just recently completed the 12th and Duncan project using CDBG grant funding. We've attempted that a few times before, but we didn't have the funds necessary on our own. Another good example is going to be Block 34. I know that came to council recently, and there was a discussion about why do we not have the money to fund the drainage for this project when we have a drainage fee. It just doesn't generate enough. So we've got natural and man-made channel maintenance, and our public works group does a great job of trying their best to stay on top of that, but that is a lot of work annually. We have development requirements for making sure that developers are building responsibly, making sure that the designs are correct and they're actually capturing and adequately, discharging that runoff to an appropriate source. And then we've got the water quality aspect, which we're calling the MS4. Well, I don't say we call it that. The state calls it that. And that stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. So it's a big mouthful just saying that it's different than the sanitary system. And then we've got the National Flood Insurance Program. Of course, that's for anybody that lives in the FEMA regulatory flood zones. They have the ability to get a flood insurance policy. And that's a very important one because if we don't keep up with their regulations, we can actually be kicked out of that program. None of our residents would then have the ability to buy flood insurance. Yes?
So for these things that you've talked about, how much money do we need? It generates $310K.
Roughly 310. Well, I've got slides coming up. We did a feasibility assessment in 2020, and we'll kind of get back into those numbers and discuss that, if that's all right. Just some general examples of capital and maintenance examples that we do. This was a pipe that was 50% full, caused localized flooding around the university area. So we had to pull that pipe out and replace it. There wasn't anything in the drainage fee account for that, so operations or public works foot the bill for that one. We have a storm sewer. This one's a little fuzzy. It's kind of hard to make out, but you can see what looks like cinder blocks down the middle of that photo. On the right side of those cinder blocks, that void should not be there. That was completely eroded out over time, and there's actually a residential driveway on top of all of this. So you can see how that's kind of a priority to make sure we fix that so that nobody loses their vehicle going into that driveway. And that's going to be funded through transportation to repair that. Unfortunately, we just don't have it in the drainage fee. And then finally, this is something we run into every day, holes in the pipes. I know you guys have seen tons of pictures in your time of pipes that are collapsing and everything like that. These go underneath our roadways. Once they start eroding out that road base, you're going to start seeing roads with sinkholes and things like that, causing a lot of damage to drivers, and again, increasing localized flooding. Another photo, same situation. Public Works had to take care of that. We have our open channels. A lot of times we run into this after our big storm events. We'll find chunks of concrete hundreds of yards away from where they should be. We have to go back in, repair all of that. Again, Public Works foots the bill on most of this. We run into issues like this picture all the time where there are some residential obligations to take care of some of this, but it causes other problems that the city then has to get involved to come in and help maintain these areas. And again, you can see localized flooding there. Ooh, this is a good one. Most of our creeks and open channels that are more of a natural state unfortunately look like this. They're so densely overgrown that you can't even get in them to really maintain and see what the creeks look like. So that is a lot of hard work that we need to focus on, because that not only creates localized flooding, but during a big event like 2016, when our creeks completely fill up, that can cause massive flooding and cause those floodwaters to stay longer on our streets and cause problems for our residents. This one I like to include because it's kind of a little bit of good, little bit of bad. From a water quality standpoint, it captures all that debris into one spot so we can go clean it up and we don't have to chase it. But on the other hand, it's debris down in the channel. It's causing localized flooding. It's hard to remove without big equipment. A lot of these areas are really hard to access with the heavy equipment necessary to get in there. And then photos of some general infrastructure that we have. This is the Boomer Lake Spillway. I included this to show some general maintenance. It's not included to say that the spillway is in trouble or it's going to fail or anything like that. But you can see there's some vegetation. There are a few drain pipes coming in on the side. Our groups do have to go in there and manage those and do some maintenance on a fairly routine basis. So all of these things, like I said earlier, they're subsidized by other funds because the utility does not, or I'm sorry, the drainage fee simply doesn't generate enough to cover all those costs. So we've got a fee assessment that we completed in 2020 as part of the Stillwater Creek Watershed Management Plan. We did present that to council in November of 2020, and those rate recommendations were based on some of those identified problem areas, the capital needs that we talked about, the MS4 program needs, and those are going to be the state unfunded mandates that we've got. Further master plan studies, that would include a capital improvements plan that we currently do not have at all for stormwater management, and then floodplain management needs as well. So as a few examples of what we've got lined up, we have Duck Creek improvements. This was it was designed from Admiral down to 6th Avenue. We had 100% design, but we couldn't fund it. The estimated cost was, I believe, around $2 million in 2008. So what that would be today, I'm not sure. I hate to even throw a number out there. But completely designed, we just didn't have the money to actually implement it. We have several segments through the Miller Storm Sewer Improvement Area. That is basically from the stadium over to Boomer Creek. And then from the north, it is bound by Hall of Fame and Maple on the south. So it's a fairly large drainage area. Again, partial designs estimated at over $1 million in improvements. And we just didn't have the money. So they sat on a shelf and now they're outdated. Babcock Basin drainage improvements is probably the hardest pill to swallow. This was back in the 2010 to 2014 area. It was completely designed. We went after grant funding to do this. We received the grant. We could not come up with the 25% match, so we lost that grant. And now further development has occurred in the Babcock Basin, so the designed plans are completely irrelevant. We can't even get in there to do what we had originally intended to do.
How much was that initial cost?
I would have to go back and look at that. I put that on the shelf. I mean, the design was completely irrelevant. I believe that the 25% match was roughly $700,000, somewhere in that area. So yeah, it's really disappointing, and we've lost grants before not being able to fund the match that we had, especially with CDBG. So it's very frustrating when that happens. Now, we did receive a pre-disaster mitigation grant that we used to really do an in-depth study on Boomer Creek, both east and west Boomer Creek stretches. And our consultant identified approximately $55 million in capital needs just in that watershed, which comes to an average of about 2.5 million per stream mile. So we took that average, and if we applied that to the remaining stream miles that we haven't studied in Stillwater, you could estimate somewhere around $50 million in potential capital needs. That's not to say that we're that far behind, but these are valuable projects that we could be completing to help get rid of some of that localized flooding, improve our infrastructure, protect some more of our residents. Coming back to those state unfunded mandates, this probably takes one of the larger portions of the drainage fee. This is all in relation to the Clean Water Act that kind of filters down to DEQ, and they're the ones that we interact with most. Basically, additional staff is needed with additional vehicles to be able to complete all the tasks associated with the permits that we have. I can't even begin to try to estimate how many different site inspections we have to do on an annual basis. I'm essentially the only one that goes out and does these, and I cannot keep up with it. So additional staff, we need a water quality monitoring program. We are enforced upon based on the current state of our water quality, but we don't even really know what that is because we don't have the funding to go take those samples and get it analyzed. And then, of course, talked about the National Flood Insurance Program and how if we don't participate in that and we don't keep up with their regulatory requirements, we can be dropped from that program, which would eliminate the ability for people to buy flood insurance. What we're proposing, this is the first step, and this is exactly what was proposed in 2020. We haven't changed anything. We're just bringing it back to you. In the blue column, you can see those are what we currently charge for residential and the commercial. And in the green column, we're looking at what it would charge if we went through with this. So we're looking at $2.46 for the residential. And then we have a variable increase. I can't even tell you, it's roughly 50%, 60% for most of these. We have the financial model from the consultant that was Jacobs Engineering, so we've got that report. If you really want to get into that detail, I'll be more than happy to send that document. But for the purposes of tonight and being brief, I didn't want to get bogged down into too many of those numbers. But you can see it's a pretty significant increase. I'm going to throw this graphic back up. Even after this increase, how is this going to affect the average resident? They're going to be paying $2.46. We are still at that bottom with comparable cities. So we're being very conservative with this, and we understand that this is not going to help us solve all of our drainage problems or all of our water quality problems, but it's a step in the right direction to take us from being 100% reactive to try to get more proactive with some of these things and get ahead of some of the issues that we're running into. We always have the potential for future rate adjustments, and some things that other cities have done that we want to look into are potential step increases or percent increases based on a future capital improvement plan that we hope to have soon. Transitioning from a residential flat fee to a tiered fee based on impervious area, so treating residential properties similar to commercial. Considering potential exemptions for public schools, nonprofits, or other organizations. And consider rate reduction for practices like rain barrels, rain gardens, or using pervious materials. So that would be anything that allows that water to get down into the ground rather than hitting it and running off into the streets. So overall, the staff recommendation would be to update that ERU value to 2,500 square feet rather than 5,000. Update the residential flat rate to $2.46, and then update the commercial tiered rates per the consultant's recommendation that we saw on the earlier slide. Again, this is from Jacobs Engineering. We've got all this data. I can get it to you if you're interested in reading through those documents. It's a very conservative proposal. We don't want to overcharge anyone, but we have to change something about how we're managing our stormwater runoff. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Zach. Do you have, just off the bat, you said I think currently we're $300,000 or so comes out of this fund?
Roughly 310 is what that fee generates.
What would that be with the new fee structure, do you know?
Roughly $858,000 a year, so more than double, but that is based on a 100% collection rate, which is basically non-existent. Any property that's vacant, whether it's residential or commercial, would not be paying that during the vacancy because no bill is being sent to the property. So,
Counselors?
So we get to about an $800,000 collection, but there's about $105 million of.
yeah. So those projects, I don't want it to sound, too dramatic. We're not in a horrible state. It's not we have to get these projects or people's homes are going to flood, but they will be beneficial. We had our consultants look through these. They offered recommendations from regional detention to upgrading some of the current infrastructure that we have. There are some property buyouts in the repetitive loss areas that we have. So a lot of different options that money came from, but I don't want to sound, like it's a doomsday situation that, everything's going to collapse if we don't do something and spend that money right now. So, but again, it's a step in the right direction.
So I attended your meeting a while back with when Jacobs was here to present. And one concern that, I can't say it's a concern, something I hear a lot is, I'm not in a floodplain, why am I paying this?
Sure.
So, we've got to find some way to explain the benefit to the non-floodplain resident,
Yep.
why they're paying the fee.
Absolutely, and this is a little different than typical utility rates because there's nothing that we can meter to say you're using X amount, therefore your rate should be this. We have to use that impervious area. So whether you're in the floodplain or you live at the very top of the hill and you're never going to flood, you're still generating more runoff that the city then has to manage in some way, shape, or form. And there are quality regulations that we have to conform with to make sure that we are not in violation of the Clean Water Act, which is there's a lot of work that goes into that. But that being said, even if you're not in a floodplain, my house personally is not in a floodplain, but when it rains hard, I've got water standing in my front yard just like everybody else. I have to tromp through the driveway to get to my car. I have to alter how I drive through town because certain routes are closed off because of the roads are just closed. You can't get through. Emergency responders may have to do the same thing, especially, we've got a fire station on Lakeview that a lot of times we have ponding right there in the road and they have to go the other direction. So it can delay a lot of things. A lot of services are impacted by this.
I think some of the photos that you showed us were really illustrated, right? So if there's blockages in the conveyance of stormwater, you could have areas that maybe aren't in the floodplain, but that are going to flood, or the wear and tear on other infrastructure that will cost the community dollars down the road. I think those are all really important things. And I think I'm glad you brought up around Block 34, because I think, right, when we have these other initiatives where we're replacing roadways that have stormwater conveyance as the guts underneath them, it's really important that we have the funds to update them at the same time. I think, especially in areas where we have historic challenges with that. So I think everybody, I think that that's probably one of the things I hear the most is that drainage in Stillwater is so challenging. I think everybody has a spot that they know gets ponded, whether it's their yard or somewhere in their neighborhood. And I feel like maybe it's complicated to explain the infrastructure that helps move that water so that doesn't happen, but it's an important thing to be talking to people about.
Yeah, and a lot of the street issues that we hear a lot about are caused and or exacerbated by drainage issues. And so a lot of times we have those conversations where, well, yeah, we need to make that fix, but there's a whole drainage thing that's got to get done, as part of that. And I mean, it's frustrating that we haven't historically kept up with the needed costs here. I get I don't live in a floodplain thing, but if you use infrastructure in Stillwater, stormwater is a part of what you need to help us fund.
Right, and frankly, if stormwater management was more self-sustaining, we have more money available for public works and for streets that is being right now deployed to deal with some of the issues in this area.
Yep.
So, because we're basically cannibalizing streets and public works.
So at the risk of making some folks upset, what's the OSU campus currently paying in their stormwater runoff fee?
Yeah. OSU currently does not receive a drainage bill.
How much impervious area would you estimate is on campus?
I have not looked up the total. I think our GIS layer shows something to the effect of 1,300 parcels, but I don't know how accurate that would be. The fact that they don't pay one, I've never had the need to go in and really analyze it.
I mean, I bring it up because I knew that answer to that question. We have to figure out a way to deal with that. I mean, that is, lots of benefit from having campus in town for sure. But, if you just think about the difference between 1997 and now on the amount of impervious area and the amount of drainage that runs off the campus, we really need to figure out a way to have them participate in the program. That's not really your job. I think that's probably our job, but I think we need to start having that conversation.
It's not necessarily a part of the rate structure, so to speak, but you brought it up with the fact that we've had some opportunities with grants where we've gotten some projects completed, and where we've had opportunities with grants, but we haven't been able to make those matching funds. I think right now there's just historic levels of funding available for municipalities for all types of projects. And, with the infrastructure bill that passed, while a lot of that is for transportation infrastructure, like we just mentioned, stormwater is kind of the guts beneath that. Or if we look at low impact development, it could be kind of the infrastructure that's maybe more natural next to it. But I do think that it would be great for us to come up with a more established framework and mindset for how we leverage the limited dollars that we do have with the funding that's available. Because at the end of the day, those dollars have been appropriated by Congress. Those are our tax dollars, and if they're not coming to our community, then they're going to somebody else's community. And I'd love to see them come back to Stillwater and work for us, and leverage the dollars that we do have, right? We can complete maybe more aspirational projects. We can take bigger bites out of some of those improvements that need to be made. And I know a lot of those grants can be competitive, and I know that there's a lot of resources that go into pursuing competitive grants, but just maybe getting our head around what's out there and how we might look at our projects more creatively, whether it's a roadway project where we could get stormwater funding included if we took a more sustainable approach to that stormwater design. I know that's a lot of what DOT's grants are doing right now, make it a road, but make it, walkable, or make it have the stormwater be more like resilient kind of infrastructure. I think that I'd love to see that, because it's just, we clearly can't make it all up, right, with this drainage fee, but that would help.
Absolutely.
Zach, I would love to see, this is going to come back to a meeting, same schedule. Are we looking at the November meeting for when something like this would get? I would love to see between now and then what the next couple of steps might look like, because what you're proposing here gets us up to the bottom of what other people have been doing for several years. And I mean, clearly from an infrastructure need standpoint, we need to address this more directly and be more diligent about saying, it's just the cause of so many problems around here. We've got to look ahead at, okay, over the next couple of years, maybe along that same schedule with electric, to say, what should this look like, to get it, to a place where not only are we comparable, but we're generating enough funding to actually do some of this stuff, to have those matches available, to have some of these projects get knocked out. So I would love to see if we can at least take a shot at what that might look like.
Sure. I think the reason that we're starting this at such a low increment is because we don't have that capital improvement plan for stormwater that a lot of others do. With this increase, we would have a little bit more funding to actually pay a consultant to really look into that. And then once we had that overall plan, we could get a more solid understanding of what we're up against.
Understood. Yeah. I would like to see that happen, because we do need to address this long term. This is, I mean, this little jump would be a start for sure, but it's not going to take us very far when we're talking about the needs that we have in the community. So to me, it's something we really need to get right sized with what we're spending here. Any more questions for Zach? Zach, I would just want to add, we know, you're out doing this, putting this kind of stuff together, coming to present to us, also out actually testing water runoff and doing all that work. The stormwater, work that gets done in Stillwater is mostly you, and we recognize that and appreciate the work that you're doing, and we certainly want to try to do what we can to make sure you're able to continue to do that work very well. So thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
All right. Counselors, reports from the officers or the board. Ms. Carnley, anything tonight?
Nothing to report.
Mr. Moore.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This evening we heard utility rate study information regarding our electric and stormwater, but please join us next week on October 2nd for the rate study information for water and wastewater. Of course, the City Council meetings and study sessions are available on our City of Stillwater YouTube, and our meetings are replayed on our municipal channel AT&T UVerse 99 or Suddenlink 14. As mentioned earlier, we will have town halls to receive feedback from customers and residents and have discussions on these utility rate studies in October. The first will be on October 10th, and it will be for electric, and then on October 12th, we'll have water, wastewater, and stormwater. Again, as mentioned earlier, at stillwaterok.gov/rate studies, we have a lot more information on there that you can get.
Thank you, sir. Vice Mayor Jaloski.
Yes. Did you know that we have a citizen request tracker on our new website? This is an avenue for residents to report concerns regarding drainage and flooding, street light outages, trash collection issues, animal control requests, and much more. Please consider using this system to let our employees know concerns that need to be checked out and possibly repaired. To get started, go to stillwaterok.gov/report. I did have a question. Does that, so it's a tracker, can they tell if their request has been picked up and if it's been implemented? Okay. Just since I have the mic, I'm going to say that again. So, we are able. So there's more people at the city that are picking up those requests, and that we are also tracking to let citizens know that those have been addressed. Thank you.
So we had the report and track feature on the old website, which actually I thought worked pretty well most of the time. I sent a lot of people there. So this is really helpful, I think, for us counselors for sure. When someone comes to say there's a streetlight out of my neighborhood or something like that, like I'll forget to actually send a text to the city manager and do that. And so a lot of times I'll just tell them, hey, go to stillwaterok.gov/report, put it in there. Somebody will pick it up. They will come back, and then we can track and make sure it's actually getting done. So I think that's really, really helpful. So please use that and tell your friends about it. And we want to make sure those concerns are getting dealt with. Councilor Hawkins.
It's OSU football season. Please consider taking advantage of the free park and ride shuttle service. The City of Stillwater and Oklahoma State University Athletics offer free parking and shuttle service from downtown. The shuttle runs every 30 minutes before and after the game. It begins 3 hours before the game and runs through the post game. We have more than 500 free parking spots available. The pickup and drop-off location is at 7th Avenue and Lewis Street. Save money, beat the rush, park downtown, and go, it says go Cowboys, but go Pokes.
Councilor Clark.
There are multiple street and bridge construction projects throughout Stillwater. We ask that motorists pay careful attention when driving in construction areas, allow additional travel time, and take alternate routes if possible. For the latest updates and additional information, including new projects, go to stillwaterok.gov/roads.
Thanks, sir. Councilor Harden.
The city is accepting applications for a citizen representative to fill the electric trade position on the Building Trades Board. The board consists of 5 members who are employed as an architect, engineer, general building contractor, or as a person licensed by the city in one of the trades. Board members must have the ability to attend hearings convened within a minimum of 48 hours' notice. The board is empowered by ordinances of the building codes to serve as the appeal body for those codes. Let's try it again. As the appeal body for those codes. It also serves as a review board for other matters concerning building construction, such as licensing practices, code adoptions, and amendments. The term is 3 years. If you'd like to get involved in your local government and help make Stillwater even greater, please consider applying online, stillwaterok.gov/citizen boards.
Excellent, thank you. I will let you know that the City of Stillwater Electric Utility Department sent a team of apprentices to the 2023 Municipal Electric Systems of Oklahoma, MISO, Line Workers Rodeo earlier this month. This is an annual event which for some reason this year was hosted in Bentonville, Arkansas. Somebody's going to have to explain that to me. I assume MISO covers Northwest Arkansas too. It's designed to foster friendly competition with municipalities all over Oklahoma and Arkansas. I guess somebody did explain that for me. This event helps in many ways. Maybe it's the Oklahoma-Arkansas Line Workers Rodeo. We've had it here before, right? Yes. I went out there. It was pretty cool. We had it in Stillwater, right? Didn't it? Yeah. This event helps in many ways. It helps strengthen professional relationships and promote mutual aid for collaboration with major weather emergencies. Also, teams observe practices of other municipalities in real-life situations to improve and ensure safety in their craft. Congratulations to the Stillwater Line Worker Rodeo team on winning several events. The team included Barrett Matheson, Jason Lay, AJ Hill, and Case Mutz. We appreciate all of our line workers and their continuous efforts to install, repair, and restore power. Their skilled service is vital to all of us. All right. Nothing further on the City Council agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the City Council. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, Stillwater City Council is now adjourned. At this time, I will call to order the September 25th, 2023 special meeting of the Stillwater Utilities Authority. We have one item on the consent docket. Trustees, is there a question, comment, or action on the consent docket?
Motion to approve the consent docket?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent docket. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that consent docket is approved. Seeing no announcements from the officers of the board, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
With a motion and a second to adjourn SUA, please vote. With a vote of 5-0, the Stillwater Utilities Authority is now adjourned, and that concludes our meetings for the evening.